So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this is actually going to be on the test build for the upcoming patch. Now, the way that this is going to be working, at least for the foreseeable, is I've basically been given the green light to harvest a few replays off of the testing channel, which means I'm not being sent them directly. Now, oftentimes they are accompanied by a screenshot, so hopefully we can avoid any sort of blowout victories in that regard. But also, I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on some of the more mechanical aspects of the mod. I think just going into these sort of pitch battles, which we don't see an awful lot of on the channel, or at least we haven't in quite a while. But I think a little bit more of a focus here, because that is, of course, what most of the testing battles do work themselves around. Of course, it is a neutral venue, many of them anyway, that these battles take place on. So it is a little bit better to tune the balance of the game, and that's what we're going to be seeing here, with a couple of Arthedainian armies facing off against some forces of evil, combination of Mordor and their near allies in Harad. So an interesting matchup. It's a good opportunity as well to see what Arthedain are like on the open field. Of course, we have a pretty good understanding anyway of how they perform in sieges, with good dependable infantry, plenty of varied archers as well to back them up. But very often, on this sort of battle in particular, with how wide open the grassy plain is, of course it makes a good amount of sense that we will be returning to the grassy plain here with the first of these battles. I think there is another one on the dry lake bed as well, which this will probably be followed up with. We might be able to go up temporarily to 2 videos a week again here. I was thinking that we'd have to suspend recording altogether for a little while, but things tend to move pretty quickly, I suppose. But yes, as I was saying, Arthedain, their cavalry can really spread its wings on a map like this, and it's exactly this sort of situation where the numbers and scarier units from Mordor may find themselves decorating the end of the Arthedainian Knights' lances, though of course both Mordor and Harad also have their own fast-moving options for more wide-open battles like this. But we shall go through the Arthedainian army first and foremost, starting off with Sprince's army here. We're going to be seeing the battle from his perspective, formerly known as Buzzard, I believe. But Arthedain men-at-arms here without the armour upgrade, and also Arthedain pikemen without the armour upgrade. If you can be sure that you're going to dig into a static position, then the armour upgrade can really be worth its weight in gold. But in this sort of situation where you want to be a little bit more varied with where you spend your funds, maybe it's a little bit harder to justify the increasing costs that upgrading the armour brings, especially more than one level of upgrade like Arthedain do have access to. On an open field like this as well, in terms of the ranged game, you'd imagine Arthedain should be able to certainly push Harad around at long range, but even Mordor don't really have the level of average quality that Arthedain do. So with that, armour upgrades become a little bit less important, and the pikemen here do mean that the centre of the line is going to be able to withstand a good amount of pressure, at least initially. We'll see if Mordor's monstrous units and numbers can ultimately crack that front line, because if they can, Arthedain's organisation could fall apart around that. This, of course, as I briefly mentioned a moment ago, is going to be where Arthedain can really lay down a bit of a marker in a battle like this, I think. Knights of Illuminus on horseback are still one of the strongest units of lance cavalry that the game has to offer, and a good part of this is because their defensive attributes with their armour and their very fine shields means that they can withstand a little bit more pressure than even some of their very high-end contemporaries. So we'll see how they can get on and see how many orcs they can trample, though of course you can see in the distance there through the mist there are some threats to their cavalry dominance. We have the Royal Court of House Amlaeth as well, which are not quite as impressive all round as the Knights of Illuminus, but when you bring them both together, it's effectively 2 units of very hard-hitting, very durable cavalry. Very expensive, of course, but when you use them in tandem, if you can use them to their fullest, especially during the late game when the enemy army starts to flag a little bit, the morale damage and physical damage they can inflict as a twosome is very, very significant. But we'll see. It's a big cost. It's a big cost to bring both of the units. Of course, it does mean that the overall quality of their infantry is going to have to fall back on a lot of their more dependable units, perhaps. Dunedain Troll Slayers, who do have a little bit of a unit model update, I believe, but it's kind of hard to see when they're skulking around in the grass. Of course, very good as far as javelins go. In melee as well, their melee attacks are also going to be very useful. Of course, they do what their name suggests. They are pretty good against trolls, even with how potent trolls are in this new version of the game. Although I think since the last time we actually saw a new patch battle, there has been a bit of an update, and trolls have been tweaked. We'll see how well they do here. The Grey Company, one of the very few examples, I believe, to still have access to the body-piercing projectiles. Now, on an open field map like that, certainly not the be-all and end-all, but it's still quite dangerous for Mordor if they were intending to mass up their infantry into a blob. The Grey Company are one of the units which can best punish that. We've got the standing Dunedain captains at the flank of this cavalry unit as well. They're not the only cavalry unit to have this. I think one of the Elven units still does it as well. Must be that Dunedain skill, I guess. More Dunedain Troll Slayers in behind the line. At the centre of this Arthedainian infantry force, which is entirely made up of men-at-arms and pikes, they do have the higher tier pike in the middle of them as well, with the Enuminous Gate Guards, of course, made of sterner stuff, and they also encourage units around them to fight for just that a little bit longer as well, which could be important here. I mean, this is a very long and thin Arthedain line. If it does fall apart, then all of Sprince's plans will probably become undone. There's also not a huge amount, actually, of ranged presence from Arthedain, so I guess I was kind of mistaken when I said they will be dominating the long-range game, but the Wardens of the North, at the very least, are one of the very best and multifaceted archers that the game has to offer. Very good in melee, very dangerous as a single archer as well, especially for focusing down higher tier units, which Mordor do tend to traffic in, so we shall see if they can find a good target to get their teeth into. Meanwhile, his ally... Oh no, Buzzard. This is Buzzard, so Sprince is not Buzzard. Sprince is someone else who has changed their name recently, I believe. But Buzzard here is going to be also playing as Arthedain. Of course, Arthedain marksman on the front line. Much more of a dependable rank and file archer, and especially against Harad on this side of the field, this sort of archer unit is going to be useful. Interestingly enough, he does have the armour upgrades here. The full plate on both the pikes and the men-at-arms, which is an interesting call against Harad. One of the things that Harad, of course, do have in abundance really is armour piercing, especially at close range and in melee. It will still help, of course. You know, having more armour is not going to make you less survivable, it's just going to make it less efficient against a force like Harad, but still, we'll see how well Arthedain can do. That savagery Harad do possess in melee is a problem, but plenty of pikes, if they can contain that Haradrim aggression, they should find themselves in a pretty good position. 2 units of Dunedain Troll Slayers as well. Arthedain going to be contesting the Javelin game. Harad have probably the ability to field more Javelins than Arthedain, but the Troll Slayers are a match for even some of the finest Javelins that the game has to offer, so they won't be out on their own for that. We have the Trebuchet of Numenor here. Very accomplished crew in melee as well. The armour piercing not so useful against the Haradrim as well, as much as they do have a lot of armour piercing themselves. It's not necessarily the most effective thing to bring against them, but again, a Trebuchet crew that is very capable of defending themselves, as we've seen in the past, is useful. The Trebuchet itself as well, in recent times, has been a very popular pick. Even on more open field maps like this, it will force Harad into moving around a little bit. We'll see how effective it can be. Arthedain's Spearmen are here as well with 1 level of armour upgrade, just the breastplate here. Standard rank and file spears like this are really just here to be a solid, dependable enough kind of melee combatant. Harad's defence is low enough to the point where even the basic Arthedain units, however, should be pretty good at dealing out damage, but they're going to be taking a fair amount of damage in response as well. We'll see which philosophy wins out. Another unit of the Wardens of the North, and another pairing of the high-tier cavalry, the Knights of Illuminus and the Royal Court of House Amlaeth. So a little bit more of a ranged focus for Buzzard, but not too much. More perhaps specialty units over in Sprince's army. Over here then, we shall start with Harad FFA Muffins playing as them. Southron Archers, they're going to be trading back and forth with those Arthedain Marksmen initially, but obviously you wouldn't really back them in a fight. The Harad weak armour is going to really come into effect here, especially with the armour upgrades that Buzzard has decided to bring. Interestingly enough, we do have the Haradrim Ballista over here manned by Southron Warband, so they also, especially with those numbers, are going to be a little bit more of a factor than they were before. But the main thing, of course, is those ballista bolts, which are immediately going to try and target the Trebuchet, I'm sure. If they can deal with that, that's a big victory for them in terms of the cost of both of these units. Trebuchet is far more, of course. After that, anything that ballista gets is a nice bonus, so a nice pick. Perhaps anticipating the the artillery pick from Arthedain. Southron Warband in behind, of course. You know, as far as a basic unit of spears like this go, again, that slight attacking edge that the Southron Warband do offer, it makes them an interesting kind of pick. But, again, as with many Harad units, it's their survivability which lets them down because of that wicker and wood armour that they wear. It's better than nothing, however, which is what the Muhards tend to work with. Muhard Berserkers here, very fragile when it comes to projectiles, not too much better off in melee either, but plenty of damage for the tier of unit that they are. Armour piercing with those bone clubs. Exactly the sort of thing which could be really, really useful and really, really efficient against Arthedain's infantry. Demons of the Desert over there, and the Champions of Nafarat are the two scariest units, certainly on foot, that Harad possess. Champions of Nafarat, there's really nothing Arthedain have that would want to face them one-to-one because of the huge damage that the Champions are capable of kicking out. There is also the Harad general unit here in his gold armour. Demons of the Desert, of course, devastating with those javelins. Combination of Southron Pikemen and Haradrim Spearmen as the rear line, which is an interesting call. Certainly not the most devastating pairing of units, but there's a lot of them, and the combination of spears and pikes can be a little bit difficult to make your way through. We also have here the Black Serpent Bodyguard, very fast moving, very dangerous off the charge, but not really going to be capable of tanking hits for too long against the heavier Arthedain cavalry, so they're going to need to keep moving. One thing that they will also need to keep moving are the Mumakil back here, of course. Only 3 of them in a unit now, but they still have all of the archers on their back. Very, very scary, these elephant class units, of course. I really like these new models for the Mumakil as well. Need to keep them moving though. They may be more dangerous than they used to be in the last version of the game, but you do still need to keep them moving. If you can do that, they can be a nightmare, however, especially with room to move, which is exactly what they have at their disposal here. And finally, Tommy, good to see him as well. We've got a Mordor force, Minas Morgul chosen on the flank, a nice bulky unit of spears, of course. I mean, Mordor, combination of numbers and a few more heavily armoured units make them a tough force to bring down quickly. Morale, however, and overall quality can start to show their weaknesses over a longer battle. We'll see if that's the case against that very wide Arthedain formation with the cavalry. Combination of Orc Fodder and Uruk Halberds is a cheap and effective kind of front line normally. The pikes of Arthedain make it a little bit more of a tricky situation for Mordor to really gain dominance in any sort of melee fight, but they're going to have to try and disrupt the pike line with other things, and that is something they certainly do have. I mean, they've got the Troll Catapult over here, another artillery piece. That can certainly be a problem, although the thinness of the Arthedain line means how likely are Mordor really to actually land hits. The Melkor's Abominations are probably the strongest cavalry-to-cavalry combatant we've seen so far, even against the Arthedain cavalry one-to-one, which is very heavy. The Melkor's Abominations are more designed for taking on enemy cavalry units. The Caragor Riders here. 2-on-1, however, the Arthedain cavalry may fancy their chances, but it's certainly the kind of unit which makes Arthedain's plans a little bit more muddied, shall we say. Orc Javelins, cheap but effective, as they've always been. Not a complicated unit by any means. Temple Guard, very similar, of course, to the Wardens of the North. Maybe a little bit more of a focus around their abilities in melee, with their, slightly more thicker armour, perhaps, than Wardens of the North, with the Dunedain aspect to them, perhaps with a little bit more melee defense. It's one of those things to delve into the stats when everything is finalised. Troll Drummers to help keep all of the orcs pointing in the right direction, which is important, especially considering the morale shocks heavy cavalry can cause. And finally, we have the Beasts of Gorgoroth, more numerous than the Mumakil, though individually a little bit easier to bring down, but still the same sort of thing. If you can keep them moving, especially with the thinness of that Arthedain line, it could be a real problem. But I think the first thing we will start off with is going to see if this ballista can take down that trebuchet. So without further ado, let's get this show on the road, shall we? So the interesting thing about this one, I think short of cavalry, a lot of the variables in this battle are going to be the evil team's units, because they have a little bit more riding, I think, on their artillery doing well because of the heavy hitting nature of the Arthedainian cavalry. But also the quality overall of many of their individual units of infantry will probably not be enough on its own to be able to break up those Arthedainian pike blocks and lines. So I think they are going to be very dependent on stuff like their artillery and their more monstrous units to be able to be those disruptors, but it's not an exact science with those kinds of units, of course. Now, the ballista bolts do start to streak through the sky, and with immediate effect, of course, the ballista being anti-artillery artillery, really. One of the trebuchets immediately falls by the wayside, and Arthedain actually taking the more aggressive stance here, which we're maybe less used to in comparison to the forces like Mordor and Harad, who very often are the ones to take the offense to these human kingdoms. Of course, we will be making our way back down to half speed when the clashes actually begin, and already retreating, but leaving their ballista kind of exposed here, and I'm not sure whether that's going to pay off for FFA Muffins at all. You can see here in the backfield as well, the Grey Company have wheeled around the lines. Mordor do have some fast movers, as we've already mentioned. The Wards of the North already firing away. I think we will actually already go down to half speed, because things are going to get pretty messy pretty quickly. The heavy projectiles from those steel bows raining down on the Mordor forces, of course, the Troll Drummers adding to the solidity of these Mordor lines. The Arthedain Shadow Bows revealing themselves as well, a very high damage unit, of course. Rangers now with their high base damage projectiles, which should be really good actually at dealing with more exposed units of pikes, or indeed these slightly exposed Dunedain Troll Slayers. The Arthedanian cavalry continuing to wheel around the flanks, and the heavier cavalry close by as well. Mordor maybe caught a little bit flat-footed here, weirdly enough. Starting to spread out all over the place, and when it comes to these rather thin, long lines of infantry, Arthedain match up pretty well. The close-range combatants, the Orc Fodder, will fall pretty easily to the Arthedain men-at-arms, and the Halberdiers, while they are armour-piercing, will find themselves outranged by the Arthedanian pikes. So there is more of an impetus on Mordor and Harad to find solutions to the frontline combat than anything else. You can see here, though, a lot of damage being done to the Arthedain men-at-arms. The Demons of the Desert doing a lot of damage to these armour-upgraded Arthedanian units as well. The closest approximation to what the forces of old ARNOR would have been. The ballista has been left behind as well, so I don't really think they've managed to get everything they wanted from this initial engagement. I mean, they've killed off the trebuchet, but I guess that's all they really were after. It's definitely worthwhile. But you could have hoped for more, maybe, from the ballista. A few extra stray shots, but Black Serpent Bodyguard taking hits from the Wards of the North again, those heavy steel bows going after the right kind of units, and there are less obvious targets within the Haradrim roster, of course. Short of the Champions of Nafarat and the Demons of the Desert, there isn't really anything you can go after and say it's a hugely beneficial use of their time in terms of the Wards of the North steel bows. Here on the flanks of the Mordor army, we do have the Morgul Chosen holding for the time being, and should actually perform reasonably well against this force. I mean, now the Troll Catapult is, after all, the only unit of active artillery left, despite 3 units of artillery being on the field. The Mumakil still not moving forward just yet, so Harad not panicking, which is good. It means they have a plan that they are working to. Over here, things are a little bit more all over the place. I mean, you can see here the Arthedanian cavalry charging forward. It's a bit of a dangerous position for them to be in, underneath the hooves of the Beasts of Gorgoroth, and of course the Minas Morgul Chosen as well. But provided they can keep moving and keep scoring charges, because of the chaos over in this section of the battlefield, they should be able to gain good field position. Arthedain, the Grey Company, the Orc Fodder, I mean, not too dependable. It may be a little bit too greedy to have gone for Beasts of Gorgoroth and Melkor's Abominations, and unfortunately for them, I think the Melkor's Abominations have taken a lot of damage, and the Wardens of the North would be the primary suspect for that. Cavalry, of course, a little bit easier to hit because of their higher elevation, so those heavy hitting projectiles of ARNOR already doing a good job, and Mordor in trouble here, because it's not looking like, again, the Nazgul, Tommy maybe being a bit too greedy with all of these high tier units, which you can kind of get away with more in a siege when Mordor are either attacking or defending, but I think in this kind of battle things are a bit more open. One of Mordor's primary strengths can be their numbers, but here going for Catapult, Beasts of Gorgoroth, Nazgul, and Temple Guard, and Ardenheim Shadow Bows, and Melkor's Abominations, all pretty specialty units, pretty expensive it's left their main line wanting a little bit in terms of quality. I mean, they haven't done too badly here against the Arthedainian front line, but that is surely going to start to change with the on-rushing knights clattering into the javelins. I mean, they do have spears in melee, another unit of shadow bows. The trolls, I think, I mean, turning their attention to assisting their ally, maybe hoping that they can be a supporting cause in a decent Harad victory. And to be fair, Arthedain struggling a little bit more so here. Front line of Harad with their slightly more aggressive edge. I mean, you can see, of course, the champions of Neferat. Interestingly enough, the Black Serpent bodyguard, despite taking a few glancing hits from the Wardens of the North earlier on, in much better condition than the Melkor's abominations in the other half of the battlefield, so they can be used more aggressively as well. And so far, the cavalry for Arthedain over on this side of the battlefield content to be a little bit more conservative. Muhard Berserkers getting kind of in behind enemy lines. I can't imagine these guys are going to last too long in this kind of engagement, though. They are a little bit overextended. It's worth going for Arthedain Muffins, though, to try and take the aggressive stance in some of these engagements, trying to overload the flank with some Southron warband. But with some spears being committed to melee, it means there's a bit more open grass for the Royal Court of House Amlaeth to move into. And yeah, I was going to say the Mumakil. Probably at this point the Hashari Stalkers revealing themselves. Some high damage projectiles once again. Good opportunities to go after. Again, Troll Slayers. They're going to need some momentum here, something which is hard to measure, but the Mumakil can certainly provide. Again, that artillery doing a good job actually at helping to kill off more Arnorians. Buzzard's Knights of Anuminous now moving forward as well. Black Serpent bodyguard and Demons of the Desert, so it's a little bit more of an open engagement between Arthedain and Harad over on this side, but unless Mordor can gain a bit more of a handle on things over here, I would worry for them. I mean, you can see over here the Beasts of Gorgoroth all lie dead at this point. The cavalry was overloading them. The Arthedainian cavalry seems to have vacated the premises as well, and some lost micro here. Dunedain Trollslayers, well, they're hidden to be fair, but the Morgul Chosen actually have kind of won over here. I mean, we are at half speed, so with things progressing this quickly, it can be a little bit more tricky to maintain full control over all of your units. I mean, it's not going to be a complete victory this for Arthedain. Mordor, that quality over the long haul is going to be costly to get rid of, but considering the cavalry support they still have and the amount of open field they have, and the Grey Company still in good health as well, with presumably plenty of ammunition, it's a very tall order for Mordor to fight their way out of this deficit they find themselves in. Royal Court of House Amlaeth with their brighter colour scheme than their knightly counterparts, going after what remains of the Melkor's abominations. They could have been a really important unit, the Melkor's abominations, but in all fairness, Arthedain very clearly identified them as a threat to their cavalry superiority and targeted them down. You can see here, Dunedain Trollslayers now wielding their spear in melee. Still dangerous in melee, of course, but a little bit more of a different vibe for them. Javelins remain largely unchanged. Numinous Gate Guards took the brunt of most of the javelins that Mordor had over here. Arthedain Shadow Bows taking another thumping charge from the Royal Court of House Amlaeth. Doing a good job there. You can see over there though, with Mordor struggling, it must be said, with what remains of Arthedain, the Grey Company coming over here from sprints to try and give his allies a helping hand. I mean, the Mumakil towering above everything else on the battlefield. Even compared to the Beasts of Gorgoroth, they are very, very large in terms of a single unit, as is only right. They are the most striking unit the game still has to offer, and Arthedain actually completely collapse in the face of the Mumakil's advance. Along with the champions of Neferat at the core, this Harad army, which did have a better balance to it, they still have defensive shortcomings, of course, but performing much better than Mordor as a result. A little bit of support, of course, from Mordor with that catapult, let's not forget that, and that will have played into Arthedain's mental collapse over on this side of the battlefield, so it is worth bearing in mind. Tommy maybe sacrificed a little bit of his own damage potential to give his allies a little bit more. Ashari Stalkers, not the most clattering charge from the Knights of Anuminous, although the Royal Court with lances down will probably connect a little bit better. This heavy cavalry from Arthedain is still a problem. As the battle gets more and more stretched, units like this can become incredibly dangerous. It's all well and good when you've got a prepared defence against heavy cavalry, but when you don't, it will really do a number on you as the Mumakil start to wade through these waiting infantrymen. This Mordor Chosen still alive on this side. I mean, the Grey Company going after the Mumakil now. How effective will that be? Just getting as much damage into them as possible and trying to cause them to fall. It'll be a close one then, this, with Harad in the ascendancy over here. They will still have to deal with the remnant of Sprince's infantry as well as his cavalry, presumably. There's not a huge amount left. I mean, there is still the Nazgul, and none of them have yet fallen. Dunedain Trollslayers are no slouches in melee, as we've already said, but they might need a little bit more in terms of overwhelming force to deal with the Nazgul here. Shame they don't still have any of their javelins left. They would be ideal. There goes the Mordor General. Temple Guard also under immediate pressure and probably won't last for too much longer. We'll go up to 1 speed now. Arthedain Men-at-Arms performing well. That's one of the features, of course, of this new version of the game, is that standard units, especially from the Western Kingdoms, used to be pretty underwhelming because they weren't really good at anything, which is what you'd expect. They're just a sort of dependable frontline unit, but their lack of numbers in comparison to some of the Orc factions meant that it wasn't really a particularly good class of unit. But now that the numbers discrepancy is not quite so big in those individual units and the quality is maybe a little bit more weighted as you would expect, this kind of unit will now be more and more important, and you can see how dependable they can be here based on Arthedain's performance, certainly against Mordor, but you can still see some of their fragilities as well when the Mumakil come marching on through. Plenty of damage done. Harad Spearmen on the way in. Still cavalry roaming around, though more depleted than it was but a moment ago. Harad still alive, although I think you can see in some of these instances Harad, while they were in the ascendancy, they are taking damage as a result of their lower defensive prowess, even these Arthedain Spearmen, which we noted earlier on. Doing their thing. Meanwhile, still plenty of Haradrim over here, Hashari Stalkers. There goes the Harad General, though, clattered by the Knights of Illuminus in this sort of open field battle now. Grey Company will need to keep moving. They don't want to get caught out by these Minas Morgul Chosen, and it is seen. Good to see there's still a good amount of organisation from this Arthedain force that has already fought Mordor as well. Line infantry combined with pikes still moving together, so in spite of the heavy nature of these Morgul Chosen, the organisation of the Arthedainians should still see them through here. There's one of the Arthedain generals as well, though. We've already seen how they can rout when suitable pressure is applied. 14 Knights of Illuminus. I mean, for 35 Champions of Nafrat is a pretty strong power spike to have late on. Shari Stalkers maybe still with a bit of ammunition. Speaking of ammunition, this is where the ranged attack of the Mumakil will also start to really come into its own. Here, when numbers are small, any extra bit of damage could do, and also any bit of extra pressure for Arthedain to move forward before they're ready. Maybe those arrows will apply it. The Troll Slayers do still have ammunition, though, and there you can see that volley is enough to cause the first of the Mumakil to fall. The others manage to escape with their lives for now, but the other two fall with that other volley, which was also very well placed. That could be the decisive moment. I don't know without that level of strength. I mean, fair play to Harad. The Haradrim Ballista retreated back behind the lines and they were nearly able to remount it here. But the Arthedainian cavalry not going to allow them to do that without a fight, although the Royal Court needs to be a bit careful. Ballista crewed by Southron Warband in melee, those spears will be striking true. Spearmen. Champions of Nafrat, a bit far behind the main lines. Their presence is probably going to be required up front, especially with Wardens of the North on the way there. I think the combination of the Arthedanian organisation, the cavalry support, the javelin support, smatterings of genuine quality from the Wardens of the North, I think this bodes well for them, although a bit of a flanking move here by the Hashari Stalkers. Competitive, this one, actually. For one picked out, based solely on a single screenshot. Arthedain pikemen, still the cavalry. I mean, definitely we've seen the benefits of Arthedain's finest, the pride and joy of their army, really. Their heavy knights and big rout that. Southron pikemen, of course, a bit fragile. The Arthedain pikes will continue to move forward, and I think with that, especially with more of these charges being landed here on the flank also, pincer move there. It's looking increasingly hairy for Harad. Still Mordor Chosen left alive, so technically no one has yet completely fallen. But everyone is going to reach their conclusion pretty quickly here. One player admits defeat. I would assume that's... well, that could be Mordor, I suppose. They are routing and broken. I think that's pretty much it. So it's just going to be a case of hunting down what remains. What does remain? Not those spearmen, that's for sure. Mordor Chosen, Southron Warband. I mean, it's going to be a good opportunity to pad their kill counts here with the Royal Court, so that will have to be taken into account in the endgame splash screen. But some of these kill counts will be inflated a little bit against foes that are not fighting back. It is the Nazgul. So it was Harad actually that admitted defeat, but that would have happened pretty quickly based on how fast their morale was falling away. Wardens of the North as well. Now with the Dunedain Troll Slayers, this is the kind of overwhelming force I was talking about, and even its gate guards marching forward with their pikes also. Seven of the Nazgul. I mean, they've been involved since early on in the battle. It's been a quick battle in all fairness. Very often we see the Nazgul endure in even the bloodiest of sieges, but what is the idea here? Is this just a test to see how many of the Troll Slayers they can make their way through? There's a couple of Arthedain pikemen in here as well. Nope. No, they are going to try and finish them off with some swift cavalry charges instead. Fair enough. Still some pretty healthy cavalry units kicking around on the field as well. It's not really a clean charge. I think the spear actually fits the aesthetic of the Troll Slayers a little bit better, although I think as a weapon type, generally speaking, spears would probably be less useful against trolls. Trolls being technically very heavy infantry units, but I'm sure that other accommodations have been made. We didn't actually see any combat trolls in this battle, which is actually a rarity. It's the one really high tier unit that Tommy did not bring in the Olag High, and we've seen them be brutally effective for Mordor in most showcase battles that we've seen thus far. Maybe he simply couldn't afford it. I mean, to be fair, when he realised the situation, I think that's why the catapult came over here, that's why a bit of support was forthcoming for Harad. But I think the right team did win. I think overall Arthedain's overall organisation and macro movement across the battlefield was actually pretty damn good. And especially in a pitch battle like this, where it's very easy, as we saw actually with some static units, to lose micro on some important units, leave them in harm's way. That was not the case this time for Arthedain. In the end, their compositions well thought through, I think. And that combined front line of pikes and regular infantry is probably, I mean, the pikes were always important, but certainly those regular infantry units in conjunction weren't really the best in the last patch, but I think on this occasion especially seeing as Arthedain were the ones taking the initiative in the early stage of the battlefield. Perhaps partly due to the artillery, but also I think that was their game plan based on the limited archers they brought. Arthedain can be aggressive even against forces which are maybe a little bit more numerous. We saw a little bit more monstrous in this battle as well. But they still have the heft to be able to do that now. Still, the Nazgul fight on. I think there's only one at this point that does still remain. Surrounded on all sides by Troll Slayers. He does manage to slice through one more. Getting stun-locked, really. Probably for the best the Nazgul are not relentless, otherwise I feel like the kill counts they would get up to would be horrific on every single occasion. I think this is going to be the end. I know this is going to be the end. Cavalry wading through. And surely now. Kind of hard actually with his black cloak, he kind of blends in. He does manage to finish off one more before surely now getting skewered time and again.
We are victorious.
Now he admits defeat.
Our soldiers
Boo!
have fought and died well today.
Should have let that Nazgul get killed off. But there we have it. So like I said, I think the right team won. I think good composition, good use of the... I mean, nothing too special in terms of like any fancy micro or anything like that. Good use of the cavalry, which of course is important. But I think in general, it was the more sweeping things that Arthedain did well on this occasion, which I think really helped them. Lack of maybe mainline quality was a bit of a problem for the Evil Force. I mean, we did speak about that with Mordor, but it wasn't as if Harad had tons of quality in that regard either. Admittedly, they're maybe less set up to do that. You'd have to invest a lot into maybe regular Serpent Guard in order to get a similar return off, and that is a kind of hefty expense all of its own. So Harad maybe can make do with maybe leaning a bit more heavily on their armour piercing and their javelins and such. Mumakil, of course, are also an extremely expensive unit, but for good reason, as we saw here. But yeah, maybe a little bit more mainline units. Certainly from Mordor, I think going for like 4 or so bodyguard units is... On an open field like this, I mean, I have made... In the past, I have whinged about this a little bit before, where it's very tempting to go for all of those shiny, high-tier units. It didn't really pay off for Mordor on this occasion, though. I mean, the beasts ultimately didn't really do a whole lot. The Temple Guard, I mean, the Nazgul were effective, of course. They were the last ones left standing, but they need an army around them to really do the business properly. Temple Guard, I can definitely see why they were brought, because they're a good tonic to deal with the cavalry. And also they can get involved later on in terms of being very good in melee. They can also be a direct answer to the Wardens of the North, so I can definitely see the logic there. Maybe the Melkor's Abominations, but I probably would have cut the beasts. Definitely. Harad can handle the monstrous cavalry. And if the idea was to go all in on that, they should have been combined as a single entity and moved around the battlefield in a bit of a Death Star, if that was their idea. But that's what I would say. The Mumakil's effectiveness in this battle, though, is probably a good example of what the elephants can do, but the beasts being quickly killed off is an example of them being far from invincible. You do need to keep them moving and hope that the enemy do not try and focus them down. As far as the damages go, I mean, again, slightly inflated in some instances. Wardens of the North doing okay. But for the most part, the only forces we saw the Wardens of the North killing off that weren't fleeing units were important ones. So they were being used properly. The 9 Troll Slayers were important, as we saw. I mean, it was pretty much the killing blow when the Troll Slayers scythed down those Mumakil. Arthedain marksmen, archers in this kind of battle have to do a lot of their heavy lifting pretty quickly. The Trebuchet was sniped out very quickly, so all 27 of those kills, or at least the vast majority of them, would have been in melee. We saw them fleeing, of course, like many other Arthedainians after the Mumakil came forward. Knights of Illuminus and Royal Court of House Amlath, of course, cavalry, extremely important in this battle. The thin Arthedain lines did their work, but they would have been overwhelmed eventually had it not been for the cavalry ripping through exposed units in the backfield, and that's exactly what they did. Sprints had a good game. Knights of Illuminus again and Royal Court of House Amlath. Grey Company maybe less important in terms of overall kills. I mean, they can be so dangerous, of course, but on this occasion they were more of a footnote. Arthedain Man-at-Arms doing quite nicely. Arthedain Pikemen as well, Gate Guards, Pikemen once again, Troll Slayers with 258 and 371, so big part of the victory over Mordor, and then later, of course, helping to finish off the remnants of Harad. So there we go. No one sent me this replay, of course, but still, big thank you to all of the players that were a part of this one and posting it up. As I mentioned, this is probably going to be, I think I am, ironically enough, getting sent away for work soon, not for a huge length of time. So for the time being, I am going to record 2 or 3 of these pitch battles to do in hopefully quick succession. And then we'll see where we are when I get back from my next trip away for work. I think there will be a few things being run here and there. I will, of course, keep everyone in the loop, but there's no danger of there being, or no immediate danger at the very least, for the next month or so of me suddenly running out of content, which I feared would have been the case, hence my last channel update. But for the time being, we can keep chugging along, and we'll be looking at the new patch through the mechanical lens, like in this replay here. So there's going to be no real restrictions on in terms of theme or anything like that for me for the moment, at the very least. Set piece battles, unless I get sent one, will be taking a bit of a back burner until release at some point in the future. But again, we'll see. Big thanks to all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.